And we are live. It's the Revved Up 906 podcast, a Detroit Pistons podcast, to be exact. And I'm Hudson.
And I'm Ryan.
And before we get into episode number 28 of season 2, I want to talk to you, the subscribers, about a few quick things. First off, we are in the midst of our season evaluations series. We're going to be taking a break this week, but next week we will be right back. So make sure to like and subscribe, turn on the post notifications button. Then also last Wednesday, we evaluated Jaden Ivey on his second season with the Detroit Pistons. So make sure to check out last week's episode. We deep dive into a lot of different statistics. We have a lot of different comments and takes and predictions for next season and thoughts on this last season. And so just make sure to tune in. A very informative episode so you can fully get your mind wrapped around Jaden Ivey's second season with the Detroit Pistons. We're going to be talking about the draft lottery and where the Pistons ended up. So make sure to comment below during this episode, whether you have a question, comment, take, opinion, no matter what it is, make sure to comment below and give this episode a thumbs up. Without further ado, let's get into episode number 28 of season 2. This week, we are going to be talking about it's pretty much trending where the Pistons ended up in the draft lottery. We're going to be talking about our thoughts, looking through the draft odds, talking about where they ended up. We're also going to be talking about the fan expectations. Were Pistons fans expecting to be at number 1? And then we're going to talk about certain prospects that we might see the Pistons take in the month of July. And then also we're going to react to some fan tweets of you guys just going off the wall about where the Pistons ended up 3 seasons in a row. Ryan, to start us off in episode number 28, what are some of your first thoughts, like when you saw the Pistons ended up with the 5th pick? I mean, there's a lot that happened we're going to break down, but what were some of your first thoughts going through your head, and where's your head at now?
Well, first off, yesterday, Mother's Day, going out to lunch with the family, just having a good time. And I'm like, oh, wait, the draft lottery is going on right now. I better check it out.
Yep.
Looking, I'm like, oh, I missed a couple picks. I'm like, oh, well, 5th is up. Well, I don't think it's going to be the Pistons again, hopefully. And boom, it hits us. It's the Pistons again. And I just felt like punching something. And I immediately texted you. I'm like, hey, what the heck is going on right now? Like, how is it even possible that we're sitting here 5th overall 3 years in a row? Like, how is that even possible? We've been the worst team 3 years in a row, and we end up with the 5th pick 3 years in a row. We've only had one number 1 overall pick, one top 3 selection, and that was Cade Cunningham. But then after that, with 5th overall, 5th overall, 5th overall,
it's a curse.
Like that just doesn't happen. The only way that happens is if it's rigged. Because you can't tell me that the Atlanta Hawks, who had a 3% chance of getting the 1st overall pick, ends up with the 1st overall pick. They were a play-in team this year, a play-in team, meaning they had a chance to make the playoffs. They didn't, but guess what? They still end up with the 1st overall pick. Like, come on, you can't tell me it's not rigged without looking at the results. Like San Antonio ends up 4th overall. They weren't nearly as bad as we were. They had 10.5% odds of getting the 1st overall pick. They ended up 4th. Houston had the 9th highest odds at 4.5%, ended up pick number 3. Washington, they were right behind us, but still at 14%, end up with the 2nd pick. They were just fine. But Atlanta making that jump over everyone, come on. Like, to me, that shows that it has to be rigged, because there's no way in heck that happens. And then there's no way that we end up with the 5th overall pick 3 years in a row. Like, come on. Now, I will say, out of any drafts, this draft class is one of the weakest it's been in a long time. So with that being said, I'm fine with the 5th pick in this draft. I'm no complaints. But when you look back at last year, we could have gotten Wemby, and we end up with Asar Thompson. I have no complaints with Asar Thompson. To me, he's still just a prospect. That's all he is. He's not he's not put himself out there to be like a world-class player, a future all-star or anything spectacular. To me, he just looks like a rotational piece, somebody who could be a good guy off the bench, a good role player. It has promise and a lot of potential, but not like, whoa, Asar Thompson, that's a steal. So you can look back at last year's draft, very controversial. This year, not as controversial, weaker class. But that man, you saw, I texted you right away. I just wanted to punch something. At one point, usually I don't text with all caps, but I was texting with all caps. I was that angry. And it's just like, oh, like, how is this even possible? Now, I will say this to end my tangent. If the NBA is to continue to do the lottery this way, televise it. I know it's televised, but the actual lottery with the ping pong balls is not televised. Show that. If you show that, we'll be fine. It won't be rigged necessarily. I mean, who's to say it isn't or is, if that were the case? But if you at least show that part of it, and everybody will come off in the comments and go, maybe it's not rigged, maybe it's just the luck of the draw. But till we see that, it is rigged.
So I have three things to talk about this. First off, much like you, the anger kicked in for me. I was in a hotel room. I thought about just throwing my phone off, the fifth level of the hotel and just let it be. The second thing is, Ryan, I may have cursed this NBA draft because, Ryan, there's a city in particular in the United States that you don't even like driving through. I was in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I think that might have to do with the NBA draft. I think I might have cursed the Pistons. Maybe I'm getting my head bubbled up a little big. I'm not sure, but I was in Green Bay, Wisconsin during the draft. Maybe there's something going on there. I'm not sure. The third thing that I have to say is get rid of Mark Tatum. I can't stand that guy. I don't want to see his bald head again. I don't even care if no one watches the draft lottery. I still don't want him on that stupid screen smiling, holding the Pistons logo with the fifth pick. I can't stand him. Get him out of there. I'm calling for his job because I think he has something to do with this. I just don't like it. I just don't like it. Another thing I want to talk about is Asar Thompson's reaction to getting the fifth pick. Because just a year ago, he was the fifth pick, and you can see the anger kind of roll in the back of his head. You can see him trying to hold back a reaction. And we're talking about Asar Thompson, who is somebody that doesn't really give anybody a reaction. And he was ticked. Everybody on this Pistons team, whether it's a bad draft or not, wants the first pick because they know they need whatever they can get. And, there's a lot of good guys that might slip to 5, but in the end, every NBA team wants this first pick, and you could see it in Asar Thompson's eyes. Roll back the clip and look at it. Look it up on YouTube, and you can see there's something going on in the back of those eyes. So I just wanted to mention that too because I saw a couple of people tweeting about it on Pistons Twitter and Pistons Reddit, but overall, it's a disappointment to Asar, and it's a disappointment to the Pistons fan base and organization. I can't imagine Troy Weaver was like, okay, everybody calm down. It's okay. It's okay. No, this is our third year dealing with this. And we got snubbed of Victor Wembanyama last year. And the fact that the Atlanta Hawks have Trae Young, Dejounte Murray. Now, I know, everyone has their mixed feelings about a guy like Trae Young, but he's still a talent that was able to get you to a borderline all-star, that the Pistons don't have that quite yet. So much going on. Ryan, now let's get into the statistics a little bit. Now that we got the hard feelings out of the way, let's look at the odds before the draft, and then let's talk about how it all worked out. So give us some of these details.
All right. So there were just the lottery of 11 teams, just going that route. Chicago at 11, 2%. Atlanta at 10, 3. Houston, 4.5. Utah, 6. Memphis, 7.5. Toronto, 9. San Antonio, 10.5. Portland, 13.2. Charlotte at 3 with 13.3. Washington at 14. And us at 14. Those were the odds. The result ended up being I guess I can go back down in the same order from 11 down. 11, Chicago, 10, Utah, 9, Memphis, 8, Toronto, but that pick is going to San Antonio via trade. 7, Portland, 6, Charlotte, 5, Detroit, 4, San Antonio, 3, Houston, 2, Washington, and Atlanta at 1. Now, I will say it hasn't been talked about as much just because the controversy around us being at pick 5 once again for the third time is you had Charlotte, who had the third highest odds for the first overall pick, fall all the way down past us at 6. So it seems like a little fishy to me right there. Now, granted, in my eyes, who cares about the Charlotte Hornets? Like, really, who cares? They're like one of the most basic teams in the league. All they have is LaMelo Ball. That's their trademark. It's just LaMelo Ball. I mean, yeah, they have Miles Bridges, but let's be realistic here. It's just LaMelo Ball. Michael Jordan screwed that whole franchise up. But the fact that you have Detroit and Charlotte, who are 1 and 3 for the highest odds for the first overall pick, fall out of the top 4 and end up at 5 and 6 seems a bit odd to me. Portland at the 4th highest odds at 13.2, like I mentioned, falling down to 7. And Washington stays put. That's fine. Then Atlanta moves from 10 up to 1. And then you have Houston, who was at 9, goes up to 3. San Antonio at 5th moves up to 4. So it's not that big of a jump or that big of a surprise there. But the fact remains that Atlanta went from 10 to 1, and then us moving down to 5 and Charlotte moving down to 6. The fact of the matter is, like, you can't tell me it's not rigged just looking at that. And I'll add this to that to back that up. Atlanta, what has been the most common talk from the play-in to the offseason now for them? It's Trae Young. Them moving on from Trae Young. I see it as the NBA maybe going, ooh, we don't want Trae Young out of Atlanta. We want this to actually work out. We want Atlanta to come back up a little bit because let's be realistic here. Atlanta hasn't been good since Dominique. Now, that is kind of a bold take because you have the years with Al Horford, Paul Millsap, Josh Smith, Jeff Teague that had a solid run. But that team wasn't anything spectacular. That team lost right away. They haven't been good since Dominique, and I think the NBA sees it as like a chance to get Atlanta somewhat back on the map and get them over the hump a little bit. Because really, to me, all that Atlanta is missing is a big man. No disrespect rather to Clint Capella, but they are missing a big man. I mean, they have Onyeka Okongwu too, but if they just are missing that premier center, and who is the projected number 1 overall pick? A premier center. So that being said, I think that's something has to do along with that and Atlanta getting that pick. But again, I don't like speaking into controversy and theories here or not, but it looks to me as if it was rigged.
Ryan Field, that is a sport reporter for now, I believe the LA Dodgers and on the LA News. He used to be a color commentator for the Detroit Pistons on Fox Sports Detroit. He tweeted yesterday, no team in the NBA history has ever dropped from 1 to 5 in history of the NBA lottery. It's now happened to the Detroit Pistons 2 years in a row, and he ends it with incredible. Ryan Field, shout out to Ryan Field. He's always a big supporter of like Detroit sports and still watches us very closely, so shout out to him. But I wanted to point that out just because it seems like everybody around the country, whether sports commentator or sports podcast, they're talking about what is happening with the Detroit Pistons. I just saw earlier on Twitter, Big Cat of Barstool Sports from the Pardon My Take podcast talk about the Pistons' bad luck in the NBA draft, and it's felt like a cruel joke. You know, so it's like everybody's talking about like everyone feels bad for the Detroit Pistons. And when talking about Pistons fans' expectations for what the draft lottery was going to end up and where the Pistons were, you know, what pick they were going to have, I think most of us wouldn't think we would go from 1 to 5 again. as a joke, like a cruel joke, I think we're all like, oh yeah, what if we get fifth again or worse, but really you're hoping like, okay, on a bad draft, like a slow draft like this, hopefully get 1, 2, 3, whatever it might be. But fifth is the kind of pick where it's like, it just feels like every game changer is off the board by now. And like I said, I'm not trying to like, hurt Jaden Ivey's feelings, Ashar Thompson's feelings by saying this. It's just anybody outside of the top 5, you're like, okay, we'll see what happens. But you would like to think 1 to 4 is where you're like, okay, this guy is going to be able to make an impact. You just don't know what's going to happen 5 and over. So I think most Pistons fans, when talking about the fan base and what expectations were be better than last year. That's all I think we were really hoping. Just don't be 5 or more. Just get us top 3. Ryan, what are some of your thoughts on, like, now I talked about Mark, what was his name again? Not Mark Titus. He's with Barstool
Mark
Sports.
Tatum.
Yeah, Mark Tatum. Well, what are your thoughts on my, I love my conspiracies. Ryan, you always kind of bring me back to fruition, back to reality.
I think he just smiles as if it's part of his job. It's almost I'm known for just smiling and nodding in conversations because it's the easiest way to go. So I really think that's just Mark Tatum's way of smiling and nodding. Just, yep, I'm just doing this. It's part of my job. I'm making the NBA look good, but I really don't want to be doing this right now. I'd rather be sitting at home watching a show or something rather than sitting here holding up a card, smiling, going like, "Yep, Pistons at 5." I don't think he's doing that. So I think he has nothing to do with it per se. I think there's just, who knows, there's probably a committee that goes, okay, how do we rig this and make it not look like it's rigged, and just go down the list. That has to be what it is, because I don't think it's one individual. In fact, if it is one individual, if anyone, it's Adam Silver. I've said this to you for the longest time. He looks kind of scary. He looks like he's just
villain.
He looks like a villain. He looks like he's gonna hunt you down and just do something to you. But if anyone between the two of them, it's Adam Silver. But I don't think it's commissioner or assistant commissioner. I think it's just there's maybe a group behind it, and if not, then it has to be just politics, and that's what it is. And if not politics, then I guess maybe it is just luck of the draw. But I don't think Mark Tatum is out to get you, and he's just doing his job and just trying to make it look like he's having fun, but really he's like, yeah, I'd rather be golfing right now, or just sitting at home, but having a bonfire, having a beer. Just, I don't think he's wanting to sit there smiling, holding an index card up. I don't think that's the case. So I don't think Mark Tatum is behind this.
So before we had a couple ideas about what the draft would look like if it changed for the Detroit Pistons and maybe going the NHL route. So we're going to get to that in a moment. But first, I wanted to react to a couple tweets that I saw following after the NBA draft. This one's from Ludi, Colorado. I'm not even a Pistons fan, but the NBA draft lottery is so stupid. This team is genuinely terrible, and for the third season in a row has ended up picking behind teams that need far less help. You're not even preventing taking. You're just punishing terrible teams for being terrible. That's kind of how it feels like at times with the NBA. That's why I think our minds go to the NBA's rigged, because where my head kind of goes to is everyone knows Detroit's a smaller market. For Michigan, it's our biggest city, but we know it's smaller market. And Atlanta, Georgia is a big market. There are a lot of people in Georgia and a lot of diehard fans, no matter what team you're looking at. So I just think that, and we know it's a growing city too, growing and growing with the rapping community, with sports, with high school football, all of the above, it's growing. So I just don't know. I always go to, the leagues are more biased to these bigger market teams, but that's just where my head goes to. Where are some of your thoughts at terrible teams being punished for being terrible? That's a good line.
Honestly, it's true though. It doesn't matter what league you look at. Like the NFL for the longest time, we were always punished as Lions. The Tigers have had their stints from time to time. The Red Wings, I mean, briefly, but there's been times where they've been um, given a hard time. It just happens in Detroit sports. I think it's the case, and maybe it just happens so much that our senses are heightened a little bit more and just expecting bad things to happen.
Right.
But it really, again, okay, we are a small market team. And Lions, Tigers, Red Wings, Pistons, we're small market. We know that. But to have like, I'll just say this: there's a lot of people in the comments on a lot of posts and here and there about the Pistons and the 5th overall pick happening, and they're going like, okay, the Pistons are clearly tanking. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're not tanking. We actually suck. We're not good at all. Like,
Yeah, we're trying.
We have some promising talent. Like Cade could easily be Batman, but he hasn't gotten there yet. He's slowly creeping there. He hasn't gotten there yet, but there's a lot of potential there. Jalen Duren, steal of a draft right there. Steal of a draft pick. Jaden Ivey has shown flashes from time to time, but he hasn't been anything special. Isaiah Stewart has panned out just to be a role player. Asar Thompson, oh, like I said, just a good rotational piece, a good 6-man, good guy coming off the bench. That's all he is so far. Marcus Sasser is kind of a steal, but picking at 26, it doesn't matter in this situation. We've had countless players drafted between 1, 5, 5, and 7, and so forth that we're getting put in these situations where we're going to have to draft the best player available. Maybe not the best player for us, but the best player available. And a lot of these guys aren't clear cut. Whoa, watch out. So when you look at our roster the way it is right now, it's not good. And then on top of that, who wants to come to Detroit, Michigan? In the situation of this was one of the comments. If the Pistons have all this cap space, why aren't they offering these guys max contracts? And it's like, okay, first off, if the Pistons were to offer a guy like, let's say, Paul George a max contract, right? You have LA also throwing in a max contract, and let's say the Knicks throw in a max contract. Paul George will 100% rather stick with the Clippers or even the Lakers or the Knicks rather than going to Detroit. Any of these big name players will automatically go for the bigger market because they know they'll make more money. That's the bottom line. And then you bring like Miami into this situation. Miami has been a good playoff team, but they haven't gotten over that hump and getting another championship. But what's going on in Florida? Oh, I don't know. No state tax. So these guys are getting every single penny of their contracts in Florida, even going to Orlando. Like they're getting every single penny. So no matter what, Detroit is in a smaller market. So realistically, it's not going to happen. So I think the NBA in any league you look at is going to promote larger market teams. They're going to promote these, even markets that are somewhat smaller, used to be smaller, are getting bigger and bigger. Like New Orleans was a small market because the NBA hadn't been there for a while. Then they're starting to get bigger and bigger as time goes on. Atlanta is starting to come and increase itself once again. And there's a lot of popularity behind Atlanta right now. There's like San Antonio, not popular for the longest time because the Spurs ended their longest playoff streak and had that drought there because you lost Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, Tim Duncan, etc. And they haven't gotten back there. But then getting Victor Wembanyama, all of a sudden there's a push that San Antonio is going back up. Houston, as Jalen Green somehow was a fan favorite amongst a lot of people. I don't understand it still. He's not a bad player. He's just not Cade Cunningham. Cade Cunningham is clearly better. And even with the injuries and whatnot and missed games, Cade is still better than Jalen Green. But the point is, Houston makes a big splash in free agency this past year, bringing Dillon Brooks, bringing Fred VanVleet. Everybody's like, okay, Houston, they're actually going somewhere. And then they end up with pick number 3. So I really think when you think about it, the NBA is promoting large market teams, and it's evident, and it's always going to be that way. It's going to be that way in any other league you look at. So yeah, I think the larger market teams are getting the benefit of the doubt here.
The next tweet I want to highlight is from Pistons Thoughts, another influencer in the Detroit Pistons community. Pistons Thoughts had to say, it's going to be hard to get excited or disappointment with what happened for the Pistons in the draft lottery tomorrow. Number one pick, cool, but exponentially less valuable than any number one pick in recent memory. Drop down 4 spots again. What happens to us and who cares? It's not a heavy draft. So Pistons Thoughts with kind of a polar like opinion from most of everyone else. My kind of thoughts is I guess if you drop to 5th, I guess you want it to happen in this draft, if any, but also it's like that's hard to think about because last year Victor Wembanyama was at that number 1 spot. Brandon Miller, who a player that maybe could have contributed a lot to the Pistons, especially the way he played in the later season series and so on. It's hard to think about it that way because you just want that win now, mentality. And the Pistons are hopefully going to make a move in the offseason with a lot of this cap space. You would have liked to pick up that free agent and then draft a guy that will kind of benefit him. But that's where the time will tell. Now to kind of switch the topic, Ryan, you brought up to me when preparing for episode 28 how the NHL has an interesting take on their draft and how it could possibly help the NBA and make it where it's not just maybe completely odds. Ryan, what are some of your thoughts on this?
So the NHL and their draft lottery format, I'll just break down some 7 points that I came up with after deep diving into what their lottery process is. So all 16 teams missing the playoffs are in the lottery. Teams with the fewest points have a higher chance of winning the lottery. And so in this case, with the NBA, it would be the fewest wins. The first overall pick is awarded by a drawing of ping pong balls, which in the top part of the lottery, you get 4 balls in there. A team can only jump 10 spots, so only the top 11 teams are eligible for the first pick. If a team is in the range of 12 to 16, wins the first drawing, the first pick will remain with the worst team. So in this situation, the Pistons would have kept the first overall pick. The second overall pick is awarded by a drawing of ping pong balls. If a team in the 12 to 16 range won the first drawing, the worst team keeps the first pick and is excluded from the second drawing. Like the first drawing, the second winner can only jump 10 spots. The remainder of the draft order is set by the inverse order of the standings. The team that finishes last is guaranteed to pick no later than 3rd. So the Pistons in this situation would be guaranteed the 3rd overall pick, and that's that if they don't get 1 or 2. They would not drop to 4 or 5. And then teams cannot win the lottery twice in a 5-year span. The reason I bring that up because it combats tanking. It just completely goes against it. So with that being said, let's say the Pistons, as an example, end up getting the 2nd overall pick this year. Next year, they won't be able to be in the top 3, but they could be from 4 to 11. But they would still have a higher chance of a higher pick. So it just depends on where they finish. So with that being said, and those points, I'm not saying like please apply that now. We've had the NBA lottery has been what it is for so long now that it's just the NBA is slowly making improvements elsewhere versus the lottery and the draft. But to maybe make it where the odds are really in our favor, or for any favor of a very bad losing team to get a higher chance at these picks, where you wouldn't see Atlanta in this situation of getting the first overall pick when they were a play-in team. These play-in teams, I don't care if they're not making the playoffs. They're at least playing in for a chance to be in the playoffs. They should not be in the lottery. They really shouldn't. So really, to me, make this step and take a chance with this system, because the NHL has had a lot of success with it. and there's been absolutely no complaints because it's not rigged at this point. And they do it live in front of you with the ping pong balls and everything. It's live in front of you, and if this were to really take that step in applying it, I really think there'd be less controversy, and it would actually probably have a more of a positive effect on what the NBA lottery is versus what it is currently.
So in our last 4.5 minutes of episode number 28 of season 2, it is set in stone that the Detroit Pistons have the 5th pick in this year's draft. Now let's talk about some of the prospects and just list off a few names, what their play style is, who we would like to see. We are going to be doing more deep dives on these prospects in weeks to come in this offseason before the draft in July. But let's highlight a few real quick. The guy I'm seeing the Pistons take the most in these mock drafts is this Matas Sabulis, coming out of the G League Ignite. He's 6'8", weighing 209 at a power forward position, maybe a great guy to accompany Jalen Duren. We know that Isaiah Stewart, we have to note, is also 6'8". Me personally, I want to see a little bit taller of a guy at power forward, just because I think Jalen Duren could use like another set of legs next to him. I seem to think a lot that Isaiah Stewart is just so mismatched a lot of the time. I'd like to see a guy a little bit bigger than that, but obviously 6'8" is the typical size you see at a power forward. What are your thoughts on Matas, and is there any other guys that you could see maybe coming in at 5?
So to me, I'm perfectly fine with Montas if we were to go that route. He's a good stretch 4. He can put the ball on the floor. He can shoot. He can defend. Granted, he's one of those prospects that needs to work on his game. He's a developmental guy. He's not a clear-cut number 1 option, clearly, because we'd be picking him at 5. But there's not a clear-cut number 1, not a clear-cut number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. There's not clear-cut guys in this draft because it's that weak. But Matas, I wouldn't mind him. But my guy that I would have a fan favorite towards is Ron Holland. He also is G League Ignite. He's more of a small forward than a 4. And the reason I'd go that way is because he can do everything Asar Thompson can do, just a little bit better. He has shoots roughly 36, 37% from 3. He's a good 3-point shooter. He can defend. He's uber athletic like Asar. Like, he's Asar 2.0 with shooting. And so if we were to go that route, I would not mind that at all. But I do see it in a world where we trade the 5th pick. I see where, like, you have the Pelicans who are going to be shopping Brandon Ingram coming up this offseason. I mean, the Pelicans would clearly want something out of it more than just the 5th pick, because they're wanting to add a piece to really contend and take that next step. So to me, like, offer the 5th pick and Isaiah Stewart for Brandon Ingram. I'm happy with that. I know that's very lopsided because Isaiah Stewart and a 5th overall pick, especially with this week of a class, is not anything to look at compared to Brandon Ingram. But the point is, like, where we are, I wouldn't mind trading out of it and getting a good, more upper level all-star snub kind of like player that's could be an all-star, but isn't just there yet. Brandon Ingram fits that mold. We talked about him at our deadline episode this past season. And so clearly he's being shopped. But Matas Pazulis, Ron Holland, Dalton Connect, just a couple of these guys I wouldn't mind making a move on. But being at 5 is hard. It's really hard, pretty much, to be in this situation that we're in for the 3rd straight year in a row.
Yeah, when I'm looking at these draft picks, obviously it's pretty guard heavy, which is a nice thought, but I'm not completely sold on a Jaden Ivey. I think he could be shipped. So I don't think it's out of the question to be talking about a Rob Dillingham or Jared McCain. That will do it for episode number 28 of season 2. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Peace.